In the heart of the academic world, Dr. Victoria Thompson, a renowned mathematics professor with strong political views, walked into her lecture hall with a mission. That morning was unlike any other. The students expected to see complex mathematical equations sprawled across the whiteboard, challenging them to think deeply about calculus, integrals, and series. But instead, Dr. Thompson had written a bold statement on the board, redefining academic priorities. A murmur rippled through the room as students exchanged confused glances. They had signed up for a class that promised to stretch their minds in mathematics, but today they were about to be dragged into a political debate. Dr. Thompson, known for blending her political views with her lectures, didn't hesitate to make the class about something far bigger than numbers. As she began discussing gender inequality in STEM fields, some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were eager to engage with the complexities of math, not to be lectured on the societal issues that Dr. Thompson believed were at the root of academic inequities. Yet, there was a simmering tension in the room. Dr. Thompson's sharp gaze scanned the students, as if daring them to speak out. She had been known to take bold steps, often forcing her students to reckon with uncomfortable truths. This was not just about teaching mathematics anymore, it was about reshaping their worldview. But in the back of the room, sitting quietly in his chair, was Barron Trump, calm, collected, and entirely unfazed by the rhetoric around him. Barron, with his remarkable intellect and quiet demeanor, had no interest in engaging in ideological battles. He was here to learn mathematics, and nothing was going to change that. Little did Dr. Thompson know, this class would end up challenging her more than anyone could have predicted. Barron Trump, the son of a prominent figure, had always been the subject of whispers. Despite his lineage, he carried himself with remarkable humility, never drawing attention to himself. In the back of the lecture hall, he sat quietly, his eyes deep in thought, his mind processing every word that came from Dr. Victoria Thompson's lips. Barron wasn't just any student. He was a math prodigy, a genius with an IQ of 170, someone who could effortlessly solve complex equations that even graduate students would shy away from. But Barron never flaunted his abilities. He didn't engage in petty debates or try to prove himself to anyone. His focus was always on the task at hand, and in the world of mathematics, that meant solving problems and seeking deeper understanding, not political warfare. That day, however, something felt different. Dr. Thompson's lecture wasn't about mathematics. It wasn't about equations or theorems, it was about her political beliefs, and she made it clear that she intended to use the classroom as her platform. The topic of gender inequality in STEM was controversial, and while the class had come to dive into the beauty of mathematics, they now found themselves embroiled in a conversation that felt more like a lecture on social justice than a deep dive into mathematical principles. Barron, however, didn't show any signs of discomfort. In fact, he wasn't interested in getting caught up in the ideological war that Dr. Thompson seemed so eager to wage. His silence wasn't an indication of ignorance or indifference, rather, it was a testament to his understanding of the situation. Barron had seen it all before. He knew that Dr. Thompson was seeking a particular reaction, one that would either confirm her beliefs or force him into a corner. But Barron wasn't someone to be pushed into a box. He understood the subtle game being played. As the tension in the room mounted, Barron remained calm and composed, his thoughts far away from the political debate around him. His mind wasn't focused on gender disparities in academia, it was focused on the purity of mathematics, on the challenge of solving complex problems. The class had come for math, and Barron was determined to keep it that way, knowing that the real test would soon come, not just in equations, but in his ability to rise above the chaos unfolding in front of him. Dr. Victoria Thompson, standing at the front of the lecture hall, had been pushing boundaries for years, intertwining her sharp political views with her lessons on mathematics. But that day, her challenge wasn't just academic, it was personal. As she shifted the focus of her lecture from the intricacies of calculus to the societal issues surrounding gender inequality in STEM, the air in the room grew tense. Dr. Thompson had always believed that exposing the injustices of the world was an important part of education. To her, challenging her students' beliefs was as much a part of their learning as solving integrals or understanding advanced theories. She felt it was her duty to make them confront uncomfortable truths, to force them to reckon with the inequalities embedded within the academic system. However, on that day, Dr. Thompson made a critical mistake. She assumed that Barron Trump, sitting quietly at the back of the room, would fit neatly into her narrative. She assumed he would be a prime example of the privileged student, someone born with every advantage who could easily be used to support her argument. Barron, after all, was the son of a well-known and powerful figure. He was everything that Dr. Thompson believed represented the societal privileges she spoke of. She knew she could easily make an example of him, putting him on the spot, and perhaps forcing him into an uncomfortable position where he would either stay silent and validate her argument or respond in a way that she could twist to fit her own views. But Barron wasn't like the others. While many students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, Barron remained calm. His gaze never wavered as he processed every word Dr. Thompson said, but there was no sign of anger, no indication of frustration. Barron was neither disturbed nor defensive. He was simply observing, analyzing the situation as only someone with his intellect could. Dr. Thompson's question, dripping with subtle implication, was meant to bait him, to force him to reveal something that could be used against him. "Did family privilege help you with math, Barron?" she asked, her voice low but sharp, as if daring him to respond. The room fell into a heavy silence, with every student awaiting Barron's reaction. It was a moment that would define the class. Most expected him to either remain silent, which would inadvertently support Dr. Thompson's argument, or to react defensively, which she could easily turn into evidence of the very privilege she was condemning. But Barron didn't react in the way she anticipated. His calm demeanor remained unshaken. Instead of launching into a rebuttal or showing signs of discomfort, Barron simply sat still, his hand resting lightly on the desk, his mind clearly working through the implications of her words. He wasn't just sitting there because he didn't know how to respond, he was taking his time, understanding the game Dr. Thompson was playing, and preparing for the moment when he would speak, not out of anger or defiance, but with the precision and clarity of someone who had nothing to prove. Dr. Thompson's eyes flicked toward the back of the room, studying Barron with a glint of challenge in her gaze. She waited, expecting some kind of reaction that would fit into her narrative, but Barron did not give her what she wanted. Instead, as the silence stretched on, he slowly raised his hand. The room went still. The moment was now his. He was ready to speak, and everyone in the room knew that when he did, it would be something that would change the course of the lecture, and perhaps, the way they all viewed education itself. The moment Barron Trump raised his hand, the entire lecture hall seemed to collectively hold its breath. Dr. Victoria Thompson, standing at the front of the class, had been preparing for a moment like this, but nothing could have truly prepared her for what was about to unfold. She had expected Barron to either remain silent, which would have confirmed her suspicions, or to react defensively, offering her a clear example of the privilege she believed tainted his success. But instead, he raised his hand, calmly, deliberately, as though he was simply acknowledging the next step in a conversation that was far beyond the surface-level politics she was so eager to engage with. His gesture was simple, yet it sent a wave of tension throughout the room. All eyes shifted to him, and the atmosphere grew charged with a kind of quiet anticipation. Barron stood up slowly, without hesitation. There was no anger in his movements, no defensiveness in his posture. His face was unreadable, and yet it radiated a calm certainty that seemed to pierce through the fog of discomfort in the room. He wasn't here to get caught in a political battle. He wasn't here to defend his family, his status, or his background. He was here for something more fundamental, the pursuit of knowledge. As he walked toward the board, every eye in the room followed him, and for the first time, the students realized they were no longer just spectators in a debate, they were witnesses to a moment of intellectual power, one that had little to do with personal ideology and everything to do with the purity of mathematics. When Barron reached the whiteboard, he stood there for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the marker. Dr. Thompson, arms crossed, stared at him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. She had expected a typical student to falter in the face of her challenge. She had expected Barron to shrink, to become defensive under the weight of her question, but instead, he stood confidently, ready to respond in a way that no one in the room could have anticipated. Dr. Thompson's question had been laced with assumptions, and in that moment, Barron made it clear that he was not going to play by her rules. He took the marker in his hand and without a hint of hesitation, began to write. The problem Dr. Thompson had posed on the board was a complex, nearly insurmountable equation, one designed to test the limits of any student who dared to attempt it. It was a challenge, and she knew it. The class was waiting for Barron to fail, to show a moment of weakness, a misstep that would allow her to regain control of the situation. But instead of struggling, Barron tackled the equation with such precision that it was almost as if he had already seen the solution in his mind before even touching the board. Each stroke of the marker was purposeful, efficient, and calculated. The students in the room, who had initially sat back in their seats, watching in quiet judgment, were now wide-eyed with astonishment. They couldn't keep up with his movements, but they didn't need to. There was something mesmerizing in the way Barron approached the problem, not just solving it, but teaching them something far deeper. He wasn't solving the problem in the conventional manner. Instead, he was applying a method of optimization, bypassing unnecessary steps and simplifying the process. It was a revelation. Barron was not just demonstrating his knowledge of mathematics, he was showing them a new way of thinking about it. Whispers rippled through the room as Barron continued to work. "I've never seen anyone solve an integral like this," one student whispered to their neighbor. Another voice followed, "I can't keep up, but why does it feel so easy now?" Barron wasn't just solving the equation for himself, he was teaching the entire class as he went along. His calm, unwavering focus made it clear, he wasn't just displaying his own brilliance, but also offering a glimpse of the kind of mathematical clarity that only the true masters of the craft could access. Dr. Thompson, standing at the front of the class, couldn't hide her shock. She had thought she was in control, that she had cleverly maneuvered Barron into a corner where he would either confirm her thesis or reveal his own flaws. But now, as Barron moved with unshakable confidence, solving the problem with ease and grace, she realized the full extent of her misjudgment. This wasn't just a student showing off, this was someone who had a deep, profound understanding of mathematics, a genius who saw the world of numbers in a way that others couldn't even begin to comprehend. As Barron finished the equation, he turned to Dr. Thompson with a single, quiet question. "Would you prefer I solve it the conventional way, or use the more optimal approach?" The simplicity of the question was disarming. Barron wasn't being confrontational, nor was he attempting to undermine Dr. Thompson. He was offering her a choice, a chance to engage in the very thing they were both supposed to be passionate about, the pursuit of knowledge. But as the silence stretched in the room, it became clear that Dr. Thompson had lost control. Not only had she underestimated Barron's intellectual prowess, but in doing so, she had failed to recognize the true power of learning, the ability to adapt, to evolve, and to step beyond personal biases in order to find the truth. In that moment, the class knew something had shifted. They were no longer just spectators, they were part of something far bigger. Barron had shown them that intellectual humility, combined with a willingness to challenge the system, was the true mark of a genius. And in doing so, he had changed the very dynamics of the classroom. As the tension in the room lingered, Dr. Victoria Thompson realized she was standing at the crossroads of an intellectual battle she could never have anticipated. Barron Trump had just solved the complex equation she had set to challenge him, and not just solved it, but redefined the problem altogether. The method he applied wasn't just a simple solution, it was a fresh perspective, a new way of approaching mathematics that was elegant in its simplicity and groundbreaking in its depth. The class, which had once been filled with whispers of discomfort and curiosity, was now silent, completely captivated by the unfolding moment. Barron had not only solved a problem that even the most seasoned mathematicians might have hesitated to attempt, but in doing so, he had taught the entire class a valuable lesson. True mastery comes from seeing beyond the traditional boundaries, from approaching a problem not as a challenge to be conquered, but as a puzzle to be understood in its purest form. Dr. Thompson stood motionless, her mind racing to process what had just happened. She had always prided herself on her intellectual superiority, her ability to lead discussions and debates that would challenge her students to think critically. But Barron had done something that shattered that illusion. He had shown her that intellectual superiority wasn't about proving one's own beliefs or outsmarting others. It was about humility, about recognizing when someone else's ideas were more powerful than your own. Barron had not once attacked her or her views. Instead, he had quietly, calmly, and respectfully redirected the conversation, focusing it back on the subject that mattered most, the mathematics that was supposed to be at the heart of the lecture. As Barron finished his elegant solution, his eyes met Dr. Thompson's. There was no challenge in his gaze, no arrogance or defiance. His eyes were simply steady, filled with an unwavering focus that conveyed an unspoken truth. He was confident in his knowledge, and he wasn't here to win a battle of egos. He was here to elevate the conversation. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the room moments earlier, a tension that had been largely created by Dr. Thompson's insistence on turning the classroom into a political battlefield. Barron, in his quiet brilliance, had refused to be drawn into that conflict. He had chosen to stick to what he knew best, mathematics, and in doing so, he had turned the tables on Dr. Thompson, forcing her to confront her own biases and assumptions. Dr. Thompson, still standing at the front of the room, was now fighting an internal battle. She had set out to expose Barron's privilege, to use him as an example to support her broader argument about societal inequality. But in the process, she had underestimated him. She had misjudged Barron not only as a student, but as someone who possessed the kind of intellectual depth that most professors could only dream of. As the silence stretched on, the weight of her miscalculation became clear. She had assumed that Barron would be just another privileged student who could be used to validate her argument. Instead, he had turned the very idea of privilege on its head, showing that intellectual superiority wasn't bound by background, wealth, or status, but by one's ability to think critically, to see beyond the surface, and to solve problems with clarity and insight. The class, once filled with discomfort and tension, was now buzzing with admiration. Whispers of awe spread like wildfire among the students. "I've never seen anyone solve an integral like that," one student whispered, still in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Another voice chimed in, "I couldn't keep up with the steps, but the way he explained it, it made so much sense." Barron had not just solved a complex equation, he had brought mathematics to life in a way that was accessible to everyone in the room. It wasn't just about the final answer, it was about the journey he took them on, step by step, through the problem. His calm confidence had turned a challenging situation into a learning opportunity for the entire class, and that was something no one had expected. As the whispers subsided, Dr. Thompson finally spoke, her voice softer than it had been all morning. "Well, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone almost grudgingly respectful, "I have to admit, I didn't expect that." The room fell silent again, but this time, there was no tension, no apprehension. The class was waiting for Dr. Thompson's next move, for what would happen now that her own narrative had been appended. It was clear that something had shifted, not just in the dynamics of the class, but in Dr. Thompson herself. She had been forced to confront a truth she had been unwilling to acknowledge, that true intellectual power didn't come from wielding influence or imposing one's own beliefs on others, but from recognizing and respecting the knowledge and abilities of others, regardless of their background or status. Barron, without a hint of pride, simply nodded in acknowledgement, his gaze unwavering as he returned to his seat. He hadn't won the battle with Dr. Thompson. He had simply redirected the conversation back to where it belonged, in the realm of ideas, of intellectual pursuit, and of knowledge that transcended the personal and the political. The class, once divided by the discomfort of political debate, was now united in their admiration for Barron's brilliance and the lessons he had imparted, not just in mathematics, but in humility, respect, and the true purpose of education. The rest of the lecture passed in a haze for Dr. Thompson. She knew she had lost control of the situation, but she also knew that she had been part of something far bigger than her own pride. For the first time in years, she felt like she was learning again, not from a textbook, but from a student who had reminded her of the true essence of teaching. The classroom was no longer a place for political ideology or personal agendas. It had become a place for intellectual growth, where ideas were shared freely, and where every student, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to shine. In the days that followed, the story of Barron's quiet victory spread across campus like wildfire. It wasn't just about a student besting a professor in a mathematical debate, it was about the power of intellectual humility and the ability to see beyond one's own biases. Barron Trump, the student who had once been perceived as nothing more than a privileged figure, had shown the world that true brilliance doesn't come from ego or status, it comes from a love of learning, and the courage to question everything in the pursuit of knowledge. As the dust settled in the aftermath of Barron Trump's quiet triumph, something remarkable began to unfold within the classroom. Dr. Victoria Thompson, standing at the front of the lecture hall, had expected a much different outcome. She had imagined a victory of her own, one where her intellectual prowess would expose Barron as a product of privilege, reinforcing her argument that the inequalities of society were embedded within the very fabric of academia. But as Barron calmly and efficiently solved the complex equation, teaching not only the solution but also the method, Dr. Thompson found herself at a loss for words. She had come to challenge him, to prove a point, but in the end, it was Barron who had exposed the flaw in her thinking. In doing so, he had turned the tables, demonstrating to both her and the class that true intellect isn't something bound by background or privilege, but by one's ability to engage with ideas on their own terms. This moment of realization was not only humbling for Dr. Thompson, but it also marked a profound shift in the classroom dynamics. Up until that point, the lecture hall had been a battleground of sorts, a place where politics and personal ideologies seemed to outweigh the pursuit of knowledge. Dr. Thompson had made it clear that she viewed the classroom as an arena for intellectual and political warfare, where the importance of mathematics could be overshadowed by the need to challenge societal norms and expose perceived inequalities. She had become so fixated on her message that she had forgotten the fundamental reason why she stood in front of the classroom in the first place: to teach. To help students understand the beauty and elegance of mathematics. To pass on the knowledge and methods that had been passed down through generations. To foster an environment where ideas could be explored and expanded upon, regardless of the political views or personal biases of the professor. But in Barron, Dr. Thompson had met her match. He was not here to engage in her ideological battles. He was not here to justify his background, nor was he interested in defending the advantages that might have come with his family name. Barron Trump was simply a student who loved mathematics, a student who, despite his incredible intellect, had remained silent and humble, observing the world around him with a keen, analytical mind. And when the time came for him to speak, it wasn't with the bravado of someone seeking to prove themselves, it was with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove at all. Barron's brilliance lay not only in his ability to solve complex equations but in his ability to understand the bigger picture. He understood that the true purpose of education was not to engage in battles of ego or ideology, but to push boundaries, to challenge assumptions, and to seek out truth in its purest form. And by doing that, he had shown Dr. Thompson that her approach to teaching was flawed, that she had lost sight of the very essence of education. The change in the classroom was palpable. The students, who had been caught in the tension between Dr. Thompson's political rhetoric and Barron's silent resolve, began to sense that something bigger was happening. No longer was the classroom a place for political posturing or ideological warfare. It had become a space where ideas could be freely exchanged, where intellectual growth could take center stage, and where every student, regardless of their background or beliefs, could thrive. Barron's presence in the classroom had shifted the focus back to what truly mattered, the pursuit of knowledge. And as the students observed this transformation, they began to see education in a new light, not as a platform for political agendas, but as a place where the pursuit of truth, regardless of the source, was the ultimate goal. As the days passed, the impact of Barron's actions rippled through the entire academic community. Word of what had transpired in Dr. Thompson's class spread quickly across campus. Students who had never before paid much attention to Barron Trump, who had seen him merely as the son of a famous political figure, now saw him in a new light. He wasn't just a product of his family's influence, he was a brilliant young man in his own right, someone who had used his intellect not to compete in a battle of egos, but to teach others, to show them that true genius isn't about proving one's worth to the world, it's about elevating the conversation, pushing the boundaries of what is possible, and making knowledge accessible to everyone. This shift in perspective was not just limited to the students. Professors from across the university began to take notice as well. They, too, had been caught in the current of political discourse that had swept through academia in recent years. Like Dr. Thompson, many had blurred the lines between personal ideology and academic rigor. They had allowed political views to infiltrate their lectures, making education less about the pursuit of knowledge and more about the reinforcement of personal beliefs. But Barron Trump's actions had forced them to reconsider the true purpose of education. His calm and calculated approach had shown them that true academic excellence lies not in pushing a particular agenda, but in teaching students how to think critically, how to analyze and solve problems, and how to engage with ideas in a way that transcends political, social, and personal biases. Dr. Thompson herself had been forced to confront her own biases and assumptions. In the days following the class, she found herself reflecting on her approach to teaching. She began to realize that the lecture she had given was more about proving her point than about truly engaging with the material. Barron, in his quiet genius, had reminded her of something she had lost sight of: education is not about ideology, but about fostering intellectual curiosity and critical thinking. He had given her the opportunity to return to her roots as a teacher, not as someone trying to push an agenda, but as someone who could help students see the beauty in mathematics, regardless of their political beliefs or personal backgrounds. And so, in the weeks that followed, the classroom began to transform. Dr. Thompson's lectures became more focused on the material itself, on the methods, the theories, and the beauty of mathematics. She began to create a space where all students, regardless of their background or beliefs, could engage with the content without feeling the weight of political ideology bearing down on them. And Barron, the quiet student in the back of the room, became more than just a brilliant mathematician. He became a symbol of intellectual humility, a reminder that true knowledge comes not from the need to prove oneself, but from the desire to share ideas, to collaborate, and to learn from others. In the end, Barron's victory wasn't just about solving a mathematical problem in front of the class. It was about something much deeper: the power of humility, the importance of intellectual curiosity, and the recognition that the true purpose of education is to teach students to think for themselves, to question assumptions, and to seek out truth in its purest form. By doing this, Barron had changed the course of Dr. Thompson's teaching career, and in doing so, he had changed the very nature of the classroom. It was no longer a place for ideological battles, but a place where ideas could be explored, where knowledge was the only agenda, and where every student, regardless of their background, could feel empowered to learn and grow. In the days that followed Barron Trump's remarkable display of intellectual prowess, something profound shifted, not just in the classroom, but within the broader university culture. Barron's quiet victory had been a moment of revelation for both his peers and professors. It wasn't just about the brilliance he displayed in solving a complex math problem, it was about the values that underpinned his approach: humility, respect for knowledge, and a deep understanding that education should transcend personal biases. For many students, Barron's actions became a turning point, a lesson that true intelligence wasn't about outward displays of power or privilege, but about the quiet, persistent pursuit of truth. And for Dr. Victoria Thompson, the once confident and politically charged professor, Barron's challenge would become a catalyst for reflection and change, reshaping the way she approached teaching, and ultimately, how she viewed her students. Initially, Dr. Thompson found herself grappling with the aftermath of the class. She had set out to use Barron as an example, to make a point about societal inequality and privilege. But Barron's response to her question, his calmness, his sharp intellect, and his refusal to be manipulated into the role she had assigned him, had exposed the hollowness of her assumptions. She realized that in her attempt to use Barron as a pawn in her ideological game, she had underestimated him. Worse, she had neglected the core principle of education, teaching students how to think, how to approach problems, and how to engage with the world around them. She had allowed her personal views to dominate the classroom, distorting the very purpose of her profession. The next few days were a blur for Dr. Thompson as she tried to come to terms with the unexpected turn her class had taken. She had expected to feel a sense of control, a reaffirmation of her beliefs. Instead, she felt humbled, even lost. Barron had shown her that intellectual debate wasn't about winning or losing, and certainly not about imposing one's personal ideology on others. It was about engaging with ideas, challenging assumptions, and exploring the subject matter at hand with integrity and curiosity. Barron had not only solved a math problem, he had solved the underlying issue of what true education should be. As she sat in her office, reflecting on the events of the past week, Dr. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted not only within her but within the entire academic environment. The classroom had once been a place where she felt entitled to blend her personal views with her teaching, where the subject matter was often overshadowed by her desire to expose and challenge societal inequalities. Now, however, she saw the danger in this approach. Barron's actions had made her realize that education was not a battleground for personal beliefs, it was a space for intellectual exploration. It was about fostering a learning environment where every student, regardless of their background or political views, could engage with the material and grow. Barron had opened her eyes to the fact that education should not be tainted by politics, but instead should be a platform for unbiased intellectual discovery. Across the university, students began to talk about what had happened in Dr. Thompson's class. The story of Barron's calm, composed response to his professor's challenge spread quickly, and with it, a new narrative began to emerge about what it meant to be a student and a teacher. Barron had unknowingly become a symbol of intellectual integrity. He hadn't challenged Dr. Thompson out of a desire to defeat her, rather, he had subtly and confidently redirected the focus of the class back to where it belonged, on mathematics and intellectual growth. Barron's victory wasn't one of ego, it was one of humility. It was a quiet reminder that true intelligence wasn't something that had to be proved or flaunted, but something that, when shared, had the power to elevate everyone around you. For the students who had been in that class, Barron's actions were a turning point. They realized that learning wasn't about fitting into a particular ideological mold. It was about seeking out the truth, regardless of where that truth led you. The political debates that had initially clouded the classroom had given way to a deeper appreciation for knowledge itself. They understood that education was not about reinforcing personal biases or pushing a specific agenda, it was about creating a space where ideas could be freely exchanged, where critical thinking and intellectual curiosity could flourish. Barron had shown them that true education wasn't about aligning oneself with any particular belief system, it was about thinking for oneself, questioning assumptions, and pursuing knowledge with an open mind. The students, once divided by Dr. Thompson's ideological rhetoric, now found themselves united in a shared appreciation for the purity of intellectual inquiry. Many of them began to see education not just as a means to an end but as a journey, one that could challenge their preconceptions, push them beyond their comfort zones, and force them to question what they thought they knew. Barron had, in his quiet way, given them the courage to think critically, to seek truth, and to resist the pressure to conform to external ideologies. The classroom, once filled with discomfort and division, had become a place of intellectual freedom, where ideas could be debated and explored without fear of judgment or manipulation. As Dr. Thompson grappled with her own awakening, the university itself began to feel the ripple effects of the changes in that lecture hall. Professors from other departments, who had long allowed their personal beliefs to shape their teaching, began to question their own approach. Barron's actions had highlighted a crucial truth: education should never be about the teacher imposing their views on students, it should be about empowering students to think critically, to challenge the status quo, and to engage with the world around them in a meaningful way. Barron had reminded them all that the true purpose of education was not to indoctrinate, but to inspire. It wasn't about shaping students into replicas of the professor's beliefs, it was about encouraging them to find their own voices and to pursue knowledge for its own sake. And for Dr. Thompson, the transformation was nothing short of profound. She had entered the profession with the goal of shaping young minds, of challenging their assumptions and pushing them to think critically. But in doing so, she had lost sight of what truly mattered, fostering an environment where students could learn, grow, and engage with ideas without the weight of external biases. Barron's challenge had been a wake-up call for her, forcing her to confront her own shortcomings as a teacher. Over the following months, Dr. Thompson began to change the way she approached her lectures. She no longer felt the need to push her political agenda or to use her classroom as a platform for her personal views. Instead, she focused on the subject matter itself, creating a space where students could engage with mathematics, and with each other, in a more meaningful, thoughtful way. Barron Trump, the student who had once been seen as nothing more than the privileged son of a powerful family, had shown everyone that true brilliance didn't come from status or background. It came from a deep love of learning, from the humility to listen, and from the courage to challenge not just others, but oneself. And in doing so, he had not only transformed Dr. Thompson's approach to teaching, but had helped to shift the culture of the entire university. Education, Barron had shown, was about more than just learning facts and figures, it was about learning how to think, how to question, and how to approach the world with an open mind and a sense of wonder. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all. In the wake of Barron Trump's momentous intellectual display, something remarkable began to happen within Dr. Victoria Thompson's classroom. After Barron had not only solved a complex mathematical problem with effortless precision but had also shown the class a new, more efficient way to approach the problem, the dynamics of the lecture shifted. What was once a classroom filled with tension, fueled by Dr. Thompson's political agenda and her attempt to challenge her students' perspectives, now became a space where knowledge itself took center stage. Barron's response was not born of arrogance, but of intellectual humility. He hadn't sought to prove anyone wrong, he had simply sought the truth in the most direct and unpretentious way. And in doing so, he had exposed something much deeper about the purpose of education. As the weeks passed, Dr. Thompson found herself reflecting on the way she had approached her role as a professor. She realized that her desire to use the classroom as a platform for pushing political ideologies had clouded her primary mission, to teach. Barron had not only challenged her as an educator, but he had forced her to reckon with the very nature of what teaching should be. It wasn't about controlling the narrative or using students as pawns in an ideological debate, it was about guiding them to think for themselves, to question assumptions, and to seek out knowledge with clarity and objectivity. Barron's quiet brilliance had disrupted Dr. Thompson's preconceived notions and had forced her to confront the truth about her own teaching practices. The shift in the classroom was palpable. Where once students had felt the weight of Dr. Thompson's political views, they now felt the freedom to engage with the material in a more open and honest way. They weren't just learning mathematical formulas, they were learning how to think critically, how to approach problems with an open mind, and how to challenge conventional wisdom without being driven by an agenda. Barron's subtle act of defiance had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond that one class. It was a reminder to all who witnessed it that true education isn't about indoctrination, it's about fostering a space where students can explore ideas freely, without fear of judgment or manipulation. For Dr. Thompson, the change was not immediate. It took time for her to fully grasp the depth of Barron's impact on her as an educator. But as she began to shift her focus back to the subject matter itself, she found that her passion for teaching had been reignited. No longer did she feel the need to make every lesson a political statement. She began to embrace the notion that mathematics, at its core, is a universal language, one that transcends personal ideology and connects people on a deeper level. Barron had shown her that the beauty of mathematics lies in its objectivity and its ability to foster critical thinking, without being clouded by personal or political agendas. As Dr. Thompson's approach to teaching evolved, so did the atmosphere in her classroom. The students who had once been wary of engaging with the material now felt empowered to contribute, to ask questions, and to challenge their own thinking. Barron had created an environment where learning could flourish, where the pursuit of truth was prioritized above all else. And in that space, true academic growth could happen. Barron Trump, in his quiet genius, had reshaped not just one classroom, but the very foundation of how education should be approached. As the weeks passed, the reverberations of Barron Trump's quiet victory continued to unfold, not just within Dr. Victoria Thompson's classroom, but across the entire university. His actions had ignited a shift in the way education was viewed, not just by the students, but by the faculty as well. Barron's decision to stand firm in his intellectual integrity had shown everyone that true academic greatness wasn't about proving one's worth through status or privilege, but about the ability to think critically, to engage with ideas, and to pursue knowledge with an open mind. His approach to mathematics, calm, methodical, and free of pretense, had given the entire class a lesson in intellectual humility. For Dr. Thompson, the experience was transformative. Barron hadn't just solved a complex equation, he had given her a profound lesson in what it meant to be a true educator. Her initial attempts to challenge him through political rhetoric had been met with a level of grace and intelligence she hadn't anticipated. Barron had shown her that the classroom should be a place for open inquiry, where ideas were explored on their own merit, not filtered through the lens of personal beliefs. He had reminded her of the purity of teaching, to foster an environment where every student, regardless of background or perspective, could engage with the material and learn for its own sake. Barron's impact extended beyond the classroom. His actions had ignited a broader conversation within the academic community about the importance of intellectual freedom, critical thinking, and the pursuit of truth. The campus, once divided by ideological lines, had begun to come together, united by a shared desire to return to the essence of education. Barron Trump, without ever trying to prove a point, had changed the culture of learning itself, reminding everyone that knowledge, at its core, is about more than just opinions, it's about discovering the truth.